Hey there YouTube, Bruised again, and welcome to my first time reading off of a script. So recently I was reading about how absurdly rare the Grandfather's Sword and on the Harlequin Crest helmet from Diablo 4 really are, and it got me thinking about how rare drops and chase items within other games of a similar space. I'm going to talk through some of the chase items and stats from a couple of games that I play, as I think that makes the most sense to me, and I already have an understanding of these games, whether that be to an expert extent or not. The games I'll be talking about are Diablo 2, Diablo 4, Destiny 2, and Path of Exile. Diablo 3 is not being used in this video, as the only target farm items that exist in that game are from completing bounties. The rest of the items in that game can be dropped, or targeted specifically by spending blood shards for a specific slot with Kadala. This entire video is basically just going to be me reading off of my computer monitor, so I'd recommend putting me into the background, maybe play some music, while I'm chatting about this. Now, before we dive deeper into each of these games and their respective chase items and drop mechanics, we need to define what a chase item really is. In my opinion, it's quite simple. A chase item is an extremely rare and usually powerful item that typically drops by farming a specific boss or a zone. Think of Starforge from Path of Exile, Ravenfrost from Diablo 2, the Grandfather from Diablo 4, or Vex Mythoclast from Destiny 2. So with that in mind, let's kick off with the classic, Diablo 2. Diablo 2, in my opinion, has one of the more interesting ways to target farm specific items and items within the game. What items are the chase items within Diablo 2? Think about items like Ravenfrost, Harlequin Crest, high tier runes such as Zod, Mara's Kaleidoscope, etc. But the thing that makes farming these items interesting is that there isn't necessarily any one particular way or location to farm them. No boss has a guaranteed drop of any uniques. They might be more likely to drop a specific item, but any enemy, as long as it's the correct level, can drop the item that you might want. You can also try your hand at gambling for any particular item you're looking for. Let's look at an example, Mara's Kaleidoscope. This information was all pulled from a D2 drop calculator from MaxRollGG, but let's say that you want to gamble for Mara's. The base odds of hitting exactly Mara's is about 1 in 30,000. Now those might sound like terrible odds, so let's look at farming the item specifically, right? How would you go about target farming this item? Where would you farm? After a quick look at the drop calculator, and assuming that you are by yourself and that you have absolutely zero magic find, the highest odds of you getting the item comes from the quest version of 4 bosses in the game, which is Duriel at 1 in 2,395, Baal at 1 in 5,205, Diablo at 1 in 5,290, and Mephisto at 1 in 5,410. Following those is the non-quest version of each of these bosses, which all sets them at 1 in 6,000 plus. I'm not going to list each of them out again with all of their drop odds. Regardless, while these items still look bad, it still gives you at least a feeling of, alright, it's going to take some time, but there are areas I can farm to raise my chances of getting this item. And from there you can start looking at drop chances for multiple items from each boss and really determine which one you want to farm the most to raise your chances of hitting good items. Now, the main problem that I personally have with Diablo 2's item chase and farming is that it really makes me feel like I should be running as much magic find as I can squeeze into my character. It's like a small sense of FOMO, and it leads me, personally, usually start off with a magic find character such as a sorceress, even if it's not something that I want to run necessarily, and then try to find items to build a more damage focused character entirely. And unfortunately, while I do love Diablo 2, I also struggle to find the motivation to make multiple characters and run them through the entire campaign of normal, nightmare, and hell and work into the endgame. Maybe that's just fatigue from playing the game for as long as I have throughout my entire life. Regardless, now that we've talked about Diablo 2 chase items, let's move to Diablo 4's chase items and the system that's in place there. Diablo 4 has probably shown to be some of the most bare bones when it comes to chase items and ways that you can target farm these specific items. There's no way to go back and fight bosses from the campaign once you've finished killing the bosses and once you've finished the campaign. You have to be within a certain world tier, which I also can't say is the worst system. In my opinion, you shouldn't be able to farm the best stuff if you're not in the highest difficulty of content. If you want those chase items, then you should be doing high chase content. That's specifically for those chase items. Now, the places that you should farm as well is the other problem. They aren't always up. Hell Tides are an event that take place at random locations in the world, and have so far shown to be the drop locations of one such chase item the Grandfather Sword. However, Hell Tides only show up every 75 minutes to 2 hours. I was seeing conflicting information on how often these occur, and last for 1 hour on the map once they do show up. Because of how these zones work, you're most incentivized to stop what you're doing and go and target farm these zones. Killing monsters in these zones drops a currency, which you then spend at a chest to get a loot explosion. The problem with this as a whole has been that regardless of the millions of players and the thousands, millions of hours as well that these players have spent playing the game, only a handful of these powerful chase items have been reported to be found. The systems in farming that exist within the game do not seem to give the player much of an edge when it comes to finding and trying to target specific items. Magic Find doesn't exist as an affix on gear, rather it only exists within Nightmare Sigils, which are items that make a specific dungeon more difficult and rewarding. The amount of Magic Find this affix gives, however, is unknown. The issue is that if a number of these uniques that are considered chase items don't exist within these dungeons, then while you may still get plenty of legendaries or rares to better yourself, there's no set way to potentially improve your odds out in the open world. You're stuck farming forever until you get incredibly lucky. While it can feel good to have such items drop when they are only this incredibly rare, the dial that exists for Diablo 4 here seems to be set far too high to be reasonable for some of even the most hardcore players within the game. Now, I would also like to say that unlike the other 3 games that I'm listing here, Diablo 4 has only been out for a very small amount of time, so there is still room for improvement within this, and hopefully they take some feedback from the community to up the drop chances, or maybe just change how farming works within the game as a whole. But now, let's take a break from the ARPG side of things, and let's move to Destiny 2. While Destiny 2 is far different from the other games on this list, it is still an RPG, and has elements of chase items and a way to increase your odds of receiving the weapon or armor that you want. A vast majority of weapons and armor within the game can be received via various means. There's a weekly vendor named Zur who can help you get your exotic collection completed quicker, legendary and master lost sectors that rotate daily and give players a chance to farm there for armor within a specific slot, which are also guaranteed to give you items that you have not yet earned in that slot first, and the Monument to Lost Light, to name a few areas in the game for getting your collection up a bit quicker. Chase items, however, exist in the forms of needing to complete dungeons or raids to get an exotic weapon at the end. By default, all exotic weapons from dungeons and raids have a 5% chance to drop. Obviously, this does include exotics that require you to complete an exotic questline to receive them instead. Think here like items like Vex Mythoclast, Collective Obligation, or Conditional Finality. The great part about these chase items is that while you only have a 5% chance to receive the item by default, there are triumphs, which are challenges that can be completed in each dungeon or raid that increase the drop rate of the weapon for you. Exactly by how much it increases your drop chance is unknown, but it does seem to be a pretty significant margin. The potential issue with having these chase items gated behind dungeons and raids is that the content is 3 and 6 player specific. For some people, that can mean that they'll never receive these items, as they might play the game solo. It's a tough thing to balance, however, because as I said earlier, chase items like these should exist within some of the hardest content in the game, which in the case of Destiny happens to be dungeons and raids. I still believe that with all the other systems and other exotics and weapons in this game, the system still stands up and works within the context of Destiny 2, and I like how it exists now. Farming can be time consuming and sometimes mind numbing, but that's target farming a specific boss or instance tends to be after you've done it over and over again. Now, with that look at Destiny 2, let's hop back into the ARPG world for the final game, Path of Exile. Path of Exile, probably to no one's surprise, has some of the craziest chase items and ways to acquire these items. Some examples of chase items are Mage Blood, Starforge, or Melding of the Flesh. Now, that's not to say that all of these chase items within Path of Exile truly are the be-all, end-all items. In fact, a majority of your power in Path of Exile instead comes from rare items that you acquire by crafting the best rare for your specific build. These unique items either just fit into specific builds or complement any build so well that they've become chase items themselves. In typical Path of Exile fashion, all of these items are fairly complex to get and farm. Let's talk about Mage Blood first. This item in particular is incredibly powerful and is one of the most sought after items in the entire game. It has no specific drop location or boss that it can be farmed from. Instead, it's an item that can drop anywhere in the game. If this item didn't have any way to be gathered outside of drops, I believe it would be about the same drop rate as the Grandfather in Diablo 4. Except Magic Find actually exists in PoE, and farming can be done at an insanely fast rate, and it isn't limited to one specific zone, unlike Diablo 4. However, there are still ways to target farm an item even like this. Divination cards are a mechanic in Path of Exile that exists to give players a way to receive specific items by either farming a set of maps in a season or receiving them from other chanced methods. The rarity of the divination cards from Mageblood, as you can imagine, is also incredibly rare, however, and must be target farmed from specific areas. There does also exist a gambling system within the game similar to Diablo 2, but instead of gold to purchase an item, a currency specific to the vendor is needed to roll the shop and purchase any items. Mageblood can be chanced from there are chase items that cannot be chanced from the gambling shop, however, such as boss items. Items like Starforge from the Shaper, Melding of the Flesh from Eater of Worlds, etc. But these items have an incredibly low drop rate, about 1% for Starforge and about 4% from Melding of the Flesh. However, unlike Mageblood, these items can be target farmed for their respective boss. The loop itself for each boss just tends to take more time. You have to farm the maps if you want to get the fragments to fight the Shaper, and you have to farm maps themselves in total in order to fight the Eater of Worlds. But each boss is guaranteed to drop one unique from their loot table, and they all have a very nice sense of, that's exactly what I was hoping to get, yes, when the item that you want finally does drop if you've spent a bunch of time farming these bosses. Or they can just have an extra set of hype to them if they drop first try. So now that I've gone over each of these games, let's talk about the big question. How rare is too rare? And personally, I think that this is a very complicated question, and it largely depends on the item that is being talked about and what methods already exist in a given game to acquire the item. For example, in both Path of Exile and Diablo 2, a market system exists, so if you are truly unlucky in farming an item, but you manage to get plenty of in-game currency, then you can just buy the item that you want for your build instead. Whereas Diablo 4 and Destiny 2 have no such market available, and you must grind out the item yourself if you want to get it. Both of these systems, in my opinion, feel a bit rough at times. If I spend all my time grinding something out, but I never receive the drop, while people near me potentially get the drop, it could feel a little bit deflating, if there truly is no way outside of just get lucky, forehead, to get an item. Before raids in Destiny had triumphs to increase drop chance, I watched a friend of mine receive a raid exotic 3 times before anyone else on the team got the drop. Of course, he didn't want the thing 3 times either, and he would have given it away if he could have to anyone else on the team. So that begs another question as well. Should trading exist within each of these games as well? Because while it feels amazing when the item you're looking for finally does drop, it can be equally as satisfying to finally earn enough currency to be able to just buy the drop and finally complete your build. For the players that don't want to have some sort of market play, they always ignore this type of thing anyway, and they continue to play solo self-found regardless. But I think that a market isn't always the best solution as well, and as it can lead to complications within the game, and annoyances such as scammers trying to take advantage of people in the game. So how rare should an item really be then? Should there be bad luck protection? Is 1% for an item too low? Personally, I believe that while 1% can seem like terrible odds, it does truly add an extra layer of excitement when that 1% finally does hit. But I also believe that a game needs to have a good balance between the item's rarity and the ways to allow their players to farm and acquire these chase items, whether that be to increase the drop rate or expand areas in ways a player overall receives an item. Thank you for listening to my rant on these various systems and examples. I'm curious as to what your thoughts on this question are. Let me know in the comments below if you have more examples of games with a similar system or ideas in general. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.